As you know, I work in the financial service industry. This is an industry that has the reputation of being highly responsive, and one that is more likely to overshoot and overreact than undershoot or underreact. And it's not because it's full of people trying to guess about the future. There's also good theoretical reasons why this is the case. Introductory economics will tell you that financial markets react much more quickly than the markets for goods and services. And even the language of our industry speaks to that. So hedge funds, for example, are viewed as fast money, moving even faster than the rest in the industry. I joined this industry relatively late in life. Back in 1998, I was 40 years old, and I had spent 15 years working in the international public sector. And because I came late to this industry, I still retain a bit of an outside perspective when I look at how this industry is doing. Moreover, a lot of my friends think that I have this DNA that is one of the consummate outsider. And it's not by choice, but by circumstances. As a child, I moved a lot because my father was a diplomat. We lived in many different countries. I had to change friends, schools, languages, curriculums, and culture every few years. And if that's not enough to make me an observer of society rather than a participant in a society, I also have a passion. And that is to combine this rather jumbled personal perspective with both my academic training and the everyday reality of working in the financial service sector. When I use this outside perspective and look at what's happening today, I worry that in many aspects, the financial service industry is struggling, like others, to adjust to major realignments. Like others, the industry is falling behind an increasingly visible and consequential change in paradigms. And let me just point out, it's not about just paralysis. It's not that people aren't reacting, but they're reacting by doing the wrong thing. The technical term here that comes to my mind is, quote, active inertia. So people try to innovate. They try to be active. They try to react. But unfortunately, in doing so, they display inertia. Put otherwise, they refuse to evolve. They do more of the same thing. If you think about it, it's basically not about what you do, but also about how you do it. And this phenomenon is very familiar to human beings. Our construct is to live in the familiar. We like the familiar. We value our comfort zone. And most of the time, that's the best place to be. Why? Because the world is mean reverting. But every once in a while, it's not very often, but every once in a while, the world does change. And the challenge for us all is to change with it. Put another way, we have to overcome two distinct borders. First, we have to recognize that things are changes. And second, we have to respond to things that are changing. Now, recognition is not easy when the change happens gradually, when it plays out over a number of years. Think of the well-known analogy of putting a frog in boiling water. If you place the frog in boiling water, the frog will try to come out immediately. But what if you place the frog in cold water and you slowly turn up the heat? Most of the time, the frog will not recognize that its paradigm is changing, will not recognize it's going through some major realignment, and it will fall victim to that realignment. Those of you who are as old as I am, and remember Monty Python sketches, there's a very famous one in which the knight starts battling with his sword. First, one arm gets chopped off, and he looks at his arm and says, oh, that's just a flesh wound. And then the next arm gets chopped off. Then the leg gets chopped off. And he still calls it a flesh wound. But of course, it's much, much more than that. So recognition is a challenge. especially when change is happening slowly. But what is less well appreciated is that this challenge pales in comparison to the second border: responding in the correct way, doing the right thing in reaction to the identified change. Even the most successful companies have problems. Let me cite you a few examples. How many of you remember Pan Am and TWA? They were dominant. They had the best routes, the cross-country routes and the international routes. And yet, they fell victim to new models that were pioneered by Southwest and others. How about the PC revolution? On the eve of the PC revolution, IBM was the place to be. They had the brand, they had the research and development budget, and they had the profits. But look what happened. IBM did not dominate that. It is not that these companies did not recognize change. They did. It is their reaction to change that was problematic. Instead of doing something differently, instead of innovating, they ended up doing more of the same. So go back to Pan Am and TWA. They decided that their reaction would be to invest more in the model that they were using. So they spent more money on the cross-country routes, more money on the international routes, and of course, that was the wrong thing, and they went bankrupt. IBM also reacted. They spent a lot of time understanding the PC revolution, but a big part of their reaction was to invest in a better mainframe. No wonder they ended up losing to Compaq, HP, and Apple. Today, in the industry that I work in, which is renowned for reacting quickly, too many participants are failing to recognize that structural change is taking place. That this change is undermining a lot of the conventional wisdoms we use. It's making the shortcuts that as human beings we're very tempted to use less relevant. It's making products behave differently. And it's even challenging the very tools that we use. And it's not just about the financial service industry. It's visible elsewhere in society. Go to the official sector. Go to Washington, D.C. as an example. There, despite amazing policy actions, outcomes are consistently falling short of expectation. Unemployment is much higher than it should be despite the fiscal stimulus and despite what the Fed has been doing. And the same phenomenon is also visible among households and certain companies. All this is taking place in the context of clear evidence that the world is changing, and it's changing in previously unthinkable ways. Let me give you a few examples to think about. We're now living in a multi-speed world in which the weakest parts, the relatively poor countries, are doing much better than the better off countries. In fact, they are growing so rapidly that you don't hear them complain about unemployment like we do. They're complaining about overheating. The economies are overheating while we have an unemployment problem. That's not supposed to happen. We also have lots of improbables, indeed unthinkables, that have become realities. If you're living in Europe today, you face the possibility of a sovereign default. Imagine that, a government defaulting. Well, Greece is very close to defaulting today. It would have been unthinkable for a mature European economy to default. Even here, a couple of weeks ago, S&P, a major rating agency, did something that was unthinkable. They had the audacity to put the sacred AAA credit standing of the US on negative outlook. Who would have thought that in Asia, China would overtake Japan to become the second largest economy in the world? And who would have thought that the rich countries would depend on the poor countries for credit? That they are having to borrow. The US is borrowing from China. Portugal is borrowing from Brazil. These are just some of the indicators of major changes going on at both the national level and the global level. And these are realities. I'm not putting forward hypotheses. These are realities. And yet the implications are not well understood. Now, I work in a company that spends a lot of time trying to minimize the risk of falling behind on critical change. We are looking around not just the next corner, but the one after that. And how we do this is the innovation I want to share with you. And the power of this innovation is its simplicity. It's simple yet powerful. And it boils down to a very simple principle that I'd like you to remember. Let structure do some of your heavy lifting. Let structure help you in facilitating peer review, second guessing, and openness to the outside world. Let structure help you continuously level the playing field and make sure that there's no misplaced sense of entitlements, no monopoly over the truth. And let structure make sure that you don't get stuck in active inertia. There's many ways of doing this. Let me share some of the ways that we do this. At PIMCO, we have a very important committee that makes a lot of important decisions about how we invest. It's called the Investment Committee. But we also have 3 other committees whose role is to shadow the Investment Committee. They are judged on how well do they second guess the thinking of this most important committee at PIMCO, the Investment Committee. Once a year, we take our people and make sure that they are exposed to the thinking of 4 thought leaders, 4 outsiders that we choose not because we know what they're going to tell us, but because we know that they challenge conventional wisdom. And then we force ourselves to discuss the world through their perspectives, so that to open our mindset and make sure that we're asking the right question. And we also exploit, if you like, our brand new staff. They have just joined us. They haven't yet drank the Kool-Aid. They don't know what the politically correct thing to say is. So what do? We give them the stage and we ask them the question, what should we be thinking? These are all simple steps, but critically and powerfully, they ensure openness to the outside world, openness to outside ideas and outside perspectives. They instill and maintain this culture that I like calling constructive paranoia. That's what we call it. They make you recognize that framework should be adaptable, and they tell you that mid-course corrections are a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. All this does something that's much more powerful, enduring, and humbling. It illustrates that in everything we do, we should not just worry about what to do, but how to do it. The how can be as important as the what in navigating big changes in life. Indeed, it's critical for human beings, for companies, for nations, when things are changing, to worry about the how. At times of extreme change, the how is much more important than the what. And I think that we are at a time of important change. And it's not just about national realignments, it's about global realignments too. This is a time that many of us will inevitably be taken out of our comfort zone. The familiar will no longer be so familiar. And it's a time when recognition, adaptability, and agility are absolutely critical. So ask yourself this question. Are you able to navigate this time? Are you able to recognize and respond accordingly without active inertia? Are you open to identifying these borders and overcoming them? Do you have the ability to sow agility? Our experience is that you can't do this on your own. You need help. And our major innovation is to recognize that structure is that help. Let structure do the heavy lifting. I hope that this simple and yet very powerful insight can be helpful for you. And I wish you all great success in navigating this historic period. Thank you again for your kind attention.